Greetings, fellow Obsidizens. Welcome to another video in the Obsidian for Noobs video series featuring tutorials, tips, and tools for new users of the Obsidian Personal Knowledge Management software. Today's quick tip video deals with a small but annoying situation involving tables in Obsidian. Whether we're using the dark or light color scheme, a table's borders will be extremely faint, almost invisible actually. Personally, if I'm using a table in a note, then in the vast majority of cases I want that table to stand out so that it will visibly delineate the various cells of the table, and thus their content. A table's borders are not just decoration. They're part of how readers understand the information within them. If the borders are faint, then readers can lose track of which column headings and cell content belong together. The truth is that people rarely read tables line by line. They move across headers and down columns to specific cells. Clear cell boundaries support that kind of visual navigation and reduce the potential for errors. Fortunately, there's a quick and easy fix for this problem, and it involves employing a simple CSS snippet. Let's see how. On screen, you see a simple CSS snippet that allows an Obsidian user to change the color and thickness of a table's borders. A CSS snippet is a small block of code that lets Obsidian users set the style of a wide range of Obsidian elements. Basically, it lets us specify the color and, where applicable, the width of various Obsidian components. Before I explain the CSS snippet before you, and then demonstrate it in Obsidian, I want to first point out that CSS snippets are a fairly large topic in themselves, and I have a video devoted exclusively to that topic. It's entitled, Creating and Employing CSS Snippets in Obsidian. I'll cover the basics very briefly now, enough to enable you to use the CSS snippet shown here. But for a more comprehensive discussion of snippets, please check out my Creating and Employing CSS Snippets in Obsidian video. In this snippet, the lines that begin with a /* and end with an */ are called comments. They are not executed as code by Obsidian, but are intended to tell a human who is reading the code what the code does. The remaining parts are the actual code. As you can see, the first block of code applies to Obsidian's dark theme, and sets a color and a width for a table's border. And the second block of code does the same for Obsidian's light theme. The reason why we must have a separate block of code for each theme is because we're trying to make the table more easily visible by changing its border color. And obviously, the color we use will of necessity be governed by whether the background against which it stands is light or dark. We want a darker border color against a light background, black in this case, and a lighter border color against a dark background, light gray in this example. The EM in the border width code is a relative measurement based upon font size. In this example, 1 EM would equal the font size used, and obviously we want the table border width to be a small fraction of that, hence the 0.02 EM. Okay, so that's the CSS snippet we need. The next question is, how do we employ it in Obsidian? Before I describe the process, let me first note some very important points. First, Obsidian expects to find CSS snippets in a folder named Snippets that is located in the .obsidian subfolder of your Vault's main folder. If you store your CSS snippets in any other folder, Obsidian won't find them and won't be able to execute the CSS code they contain. Second point, a CSS snippet must be saved as a plain text file. Thus, you must use a plain text editor to create it. Windows Notepad works fine, but there are others out there. And finally, the CSS snippet file must be saved with a .css file extension. Please be aware that Windows Notepad saves its files with a .txt file extension by default, so we must first change that file extension to .css before we save the file. Okay, with all that understood, let's see the actual procedure. The procedure for creating and employing a CSS snippet in Obsidian is as follows. Oh, and I will demonstrate all of this in an actual Vault after I talk through it. Okay, first, type the code for the CSS snippet in a plain text editor program such as Windows Notepad. Second, save the CSS snippet file to the snippets folder that is located in the .obsidian folder of your Vault's main folder. You can use any valid file name you like for the CSS snippet file, but the file extension must be CSS. It's best to use a file name that identifies the snippet's function. In Obsidian, go to Settings, Appearance, CSS Snippets, and click the greater than symbol at the extreme right. This will bring you into the CSS Snippets interface. If your vault does not already have a snippets folder, you can create it here by clicking on the folder icon at the upper right. This will also open the snippets folder in Windows Explorer or Windows File Manager. Step 5. Look for the CSS snippet you created and saved. It will appear as the file name you saved it under. If you don't see it, click the Reload Snippets icon that is next to the folder icon. Step 6. To the right of your CSS snippet, slide its corresponding switch to the right to turn the snippet on. The switch will turn purple in color when it's in the on state. 7. Now check a note that should be affected by this snippet to ensure that it's working properly. For our example, I'll check the table border color and see that it has changed in accordance with the color that I put in our snippet. Finally, if your CSS snippet is not functioning as intended, then troubleshoot it as follows. First, check that your CSS snippet style, rule, code, and syntax are correct. Anything with computers that involves code has to adhere exactly to the rules and the syntax for that code. Any slight deviation will make the code not function. The spelling of commands or names of features, required punctuation, things like that. They're very, very particular, so you have to be very careful that you adhere exactly to the rules for that code. Secondly, ensure that you save the file using a .css file extension. This is a mistake I make frequently. I'll create the CSS snippet in Windows Notepad, and because I'm anxious to get it going, I'll save it without changing the file extension, and then it's saved with the default extension, which is .txt. And the code won't work. Even if the syntax is correct, even if I saved it to the correct folder, if I don't give it the correct file extension, .css, then it won't work. So check that you've done that correctly. Third, ensure that you save the file to the snippets folder within the .obsidian subfolder of your Vault's main folder. As I said earlier, if you don't save it in the snippets folder, then Obsidian won't be able to find it and will not be able to execute its code. Finally, ensure that you set the snippet switch to on and that you reloaded snippets in Obsidian settings. Usually if a snippet's not working, the problem is in one of these 4 areas. Okay, I know this seems like a lot to do, but it's not nearly as bad as it seems, especially after you've done it a few times. Let me demonstrate all of this now in an actual vault. Okay, I'm in my cooking demo vault. I have a note here titled Table, No CSS, and I've created a table. And I don't know if you can see it. The tables, as I said at the outset, are so faint in Obsidian that you can barely see them. This is how tables look by default in Obsidian. And you can see why it drives me crazy when I use them and why I feel the need to enhance their appearance. So that's the table in the normal default state of Obsidian. Let me show you the snippet now and how we create it in Notepad. Okay, so here's the snippet in Notepad. It should look exactly the way I showed you in the presentation. We've got the first block of text for the theme dark and the second for theme light. Even if you don't know CSS, you could figure out that this first command sets the table border color to light gray and sets the table border width to 0.02 EM. And this block of code does the same thing for theme light, except it sets the border color to black. Remember, when we're in light theme in Obsidian, the background is light, so we want to enhance the table by making the border darker. In dark mode, the background's dark, so we want to make the border color light. Now, once we save this, and I'll demonstrate that shortly, once we save this to the snippets folder in Obsidian and activate it, presuming everything works correctly, we can then take this code in Windows Notepad and make changes to the color or the table or the border width and save it again, and those changes will immediately take effect. So you can experiment with this and play around with it and try different colors, different thicknesses until you find a combination that works well for you. And I'll demonstrate that as well. Okay, I already have this saved to my snippets folder, but basically, here's what we would do. Click File, Save As, give it a meaningful name. I called it Table Border Color -Width. In other words, a name that succinctly describes what that CSS snippet does. And then I did remember this time to give it the .css file extension. Okay, I already made the change. If I hadn't done this earlier, you would see a .txt file extension here. And if I had saved it that way, it wouldn't work. So I already made the adjustment with the file extension. And I've already navigated to the snippets folder in the .obsidian subfolder of my cooking vault. And I'll show you that now. Okay, I'm in Windows File Explorer. And these are some of the vaults I have. I'm using my cooking demo vault. So I'm going to open the folder. This is the folder for the entire vault. Within that folder, there are other folders and files. These folders are actual folders in the navigation panel or File Explorer panel in the vault. But here's the .obsidian subfolder of the vault's main folder. And within that folder, there should be a folder for snippets, and if you use plugins, for community plugins, for plugins as well. All right, now I've already created the snippets folder. Obsidian vaults do not come with a snippets folder by default. So if you're starting fresh and you don't have a snippets folder, you have to create it. You can do that one of two ways. You can do it manually, the way you create folders in Windows. In other words, you can click on New and Folder, and then create the folder. You must give it this name, Snippets, S-N-I-P-P-E-T-S, and the S must be lowercase. All the characters must be lowercase. Or you can create it from within Obsidian, and I'll show you that when we get inside Obsidian settings. But this is the Snippets folder, and I'm opening that, and here's the file. This is the CSS snippet, table border color -width. I've already saved it from Windows Notepad to the snippets folder in my vault. Okay, I'm going to go through the process of turning it on now. Before I do, remember how faint this is, because once I click it on, it's going to change if I did everything correctly. All right, so now we go into Obsidian settings, the gear in the lower left. We click on Appearance, and then find CSS Snippets down here, and click that. That brings us into our list of snippets. I have a variety of snippets here. They're all off now. The one I'm interested in is the one I just showed you, table border color width. I'm about to turn that on. One last peek. Actually, I can keep this down here. There's the table in the note. When I click this on, you see the effect of the code. I've brightened the table border color by making it light gray, and I've thickened the border a little bit. If I turn it off, I'm back to the default. Huge difference. This used to drive me crazy. These faint tables drove me nuts. I use tables a lot in Obsidian, and it drove me crazy that you could barely see them. I put this snippet in every vault I create now. Okay. This is the snippet reload that I mentioned earlier. Sometimes when you save a snippet to the snippets folder, it doesn't register in Obsidian right away. So as I said earlier when I went through the process, after you save it, you go in here, you go to Settings, Appearance, CSS Snippets. If you don't see it listed, and by the way, it's going to be listed under the name that you used as the file name. So when you save that file, when you did save as, whatever name you put here, table border color -width is what I chose, and you can give it any name you want, is the name that's going to appear under in the snippet settings in your vault. So table border color -width. If you don't see it, hit the reload snippets button. That'll refresh the view here, and if you did everything correctly, Obsidian will register the presence of this new snippet in that snippets folder and will show it in the listing. And then you click it on here. If your vault does not have a snippets folder, then before you save any snippets, you need to create that folder. And as I said earlier, you can either create it manually as you would create any folder in Windows, or you can click this icon. It says Open Snippets Folder, but if you don't have a snippets folder, the first time you click this, it will create the folder and then open it. As you saw, I already have the folder, so if I click this, it'll just open it. It opens it in Windows File Manager or File Explorer. But if you do not have that folder, if you're starting fresh, click that. It'll make the folder, and then it will open it. So that's the easier way to do it rather than doing it manually. So again, you could see once I click that on, it takes effect. If I turn it off, it's back to the normal default state. All right, let me leave it on. Now, here's the snippet. It's saved to that snippets folder. I can play around with the colors and the thicknesses and resave it, and I'll see the effect instantly in my vault. So if I don't like light gray, and I'm going to use some extreme colors here just to make the point, I'll put red there, and I'll save the file, and we should immediately see the border color turn red. There it is. I can change the thickness from 0.02 to 0.22, and when I save it, it's a lot thicker. I don't know if there is a light blue. I'm assuming there is. Let's try it and see. Apparently there is. Okay. So that's the idea. Once you've created the snippet, you've saved it to the appropriate location, turned it on in Obsidian settings, you can then take the Windows Notepad containing the code for that snippet and keep changing the values and resaving it and play around with different possibilities, different combinations. Let's look at light theme. I don't use light theme, but let's take a peek at it anyway. I'm going to go into settings. I'm going to turn off that snippet. And I'm going to change the theme from dark to light. There's the table in the light theme. Again, it's very faint. If I go into my snippets and activate the snippet, remember I set, for the light theme, I set the border color to black. And again, I gave it the thickness of 0.02 EM. And you can see it's much, much clearer when I turn on the snippet. Snippet off, snippet on. Okay, let's go back to, oops, I shouldn't have shut that. Let's go back to dark theme. And that's really all there is to it. Create the CSS snippet file in a plain text editor like Windows Notepad. Save it to your Vault Snippets folder. If you don't have one, you could create it manually or create it through settings, as I showed you, by clicking on that file icon. In settings, reload the snippets, and then turn your CSS snippet on by sliding the switch. And then check that the snippet took effect as expected. In other words, in this case, go back and look at a table and see if it looks enhanced the way you expect it to. As I said before, that long list of steps with the procedure, really not all that bad. Do it a few times, you'll find that it doesn't feel nearly as intimidating as it at first seems. So there you have it. A simple CSS snippet that improves the visibility of tables in Obsidian. It lets you brighten, darken, or colorize your Obsidian table borders, as well as thicken the border outline. Personally, I use tables a lot in my vaults, and I make it a point to put this snippet in every vault I create. Okay, fellow Obsidians, that's all I have for now. I'll see you in the next video. Happy note-taking.